Hi everybody, welcome back on Lit Up with Annie. Today in this session we are going to begin with Age of Chaucer. So we have already completed the Old English period, age of Anglo-Saxon and the Anglo-Norman age, and today we will be beginning with Age of Chaucer, the historical part basically. So in this entire session we will look at the history of certain kings and what were the changes, political changes, social changes that were there in this age, and then we will look at the writer Geoffrey Chaucer in detail, not the literary part, but we will just an overview of Geoffrey Chaucer. In the other session, the next session, we will look at the other writers also of Age of Chaucer. So let's begin. In the previous session, one of the sessions, we talked about the list of kings. I hope you remember. And the last king that we talked about was Stephen. So I talked about William the Conqueror after the Norman conquest, and I told you how Stephen became the king after Henry the First. Henry the First had no male heir, so he had named Matilda, his daughter, as the queen. But before she could actually take up the throne, there were so many people who were against her, and it was not even in fashion to name a female heir. So Stephen was the nephew of Henry the First, and Stephen took the ship, came to England, and claimed the throne to himself. After Stephen became the king, Henry II became the king. Now Henry II कौन था? He was the son of Matilda. Stephen had taken the throne of Matilda. He had to name the son of Matilda as the king. So Henry II became the king, son of Matilda, who was the daughter of Henry I. So that was from 1154 to 1189. After Henry II, Richard I, who was the son of Henry II, became the king. Then John, son of Henry II. So after that, son came and became the king. Then Henry III, who was the son of John, became the king. This is till 1272. Then came Edward I, the son of Henry III. Then came Edward II, and finally Edward III. Edward III comes in the age of Chaucer. Edward III was the son of Edward II. He began his reign in 1327 and his reign ended in 1377. Age of Chaucer begins, see, it's different in different books actually. But let's say if we see in terms of Chaucer being born, then somewhere around 1340, we will say it begins. Sometimes in the books it's 1350 also, and even the ending date is not really specific in different books. Somewhere it is 1400, somewhere it is 1485 when Renaissance begins, 1485. So Edward III comes in the reign of, comes in the age of Chaucer. Edward III was a brilliant king in terms of politics. A lot of political changes took place in Edward III's reign, especially military success. He restored the royal authority after we had a disastrous reign of Edward II, his father. तो एक disastrous reign type था. तो Edward III ने आके वो transform किया. He transformed England into one of the most formidable military powers in Europe. So this was Edward III. And also 50 long years he reigned. This is one of the longest reign in the English history. Even his son is very famous. I don't know if you've heard the name of the Black Prince. He couldn't become the king because he died before his father, but he helped his father a lot. Edward III and Edward the Black Prince won so many battles in the foreign land, in France also. So that is why the Black Prince is a very famous name. So he was his eldest son, the Black Prince. 100 Years is War. 100 Years is War began in 1337. It ended in 1453. Now, what was it? It was basically a conflict between England and France. Why did this conflict begin in the first place? Obviously, it was a Game of Thrones. Who would be the king? Where? It originated when English kings claimed the French throne. तो कुछ हुआ होगा, anyway they would, the wives sometimes would be French, the king would be English. It went on like that. So एक time आया when the English kings started claiming the French throne also. I won't go into detail. It went on for 116 years. Just imagine, 5 generations of kings and queens, they fought for the throne of France. So at that point of time, Charles IV was there in France and he died without an heir. This is how it began. Female succession was not, there was a law in France which forbade the female daughters, the female queen to become queens, to succeed as an heir. So it was not allowed. Charles IV के पास male heir था ही नहीं. The closest relative that he had was Edward III of England. Why? Because of his mother. His mother, Edward III's mother, was Charles's sister, Isabella. Her name was Isabella. So that was the closest link, and he was English. Edward III. And this is where it begins. Isabella said, okay, the mother Isabella claimed the throne of France कि अब चार्ल्स द फोर्थ के पास तो कोई हेयर है नहीं, तो मेरे बेटे को मिल जाना चाहिए, इजाबेला ने बोला. So but the French nobility was against it. उन्होंने बोला, French nobility ने, that anyway females are not allowed. They don't have any right over the throne. So if Isabella, you don't have any right over the throne, how can you pass on that right to your son? So that is why Edward III was not allowed to take the throne. So it was given to Philip. Later on, some conflicts took place, and at first Edward III stepped back. But later on, something happened and they had to fight, and Edward III went on to fight with Philip, this time by force, to take the throne. And this is the beginning of 100 Years' War. After Edward III, Richard II, who was the son of Edward the Black Prince. Edward the Black Prince was the son of Edward III, but he died before his father. He couldn't be the king. Therefore, the grandson of Edward III was to become the king. It was Richard II. 1377, say 1399 he reigned. He was very young when he became the king. Now, this marks the social changes in England during the age of Chaucer. Social change is how there was now a big gap between the rich and poor. The rich were becoming rich, and the poor were becoming more poor. This marks the contrast between luxury and poverty. He was only 10 years old when he succeeded the throne. And now the wealthy were becoming wealthy, and बेचारे जो peasants थे, they were overtaxed. And it led to the Peasants' Revolt. I hope you are all aware of the Peasants' Revolt. Peasants' Revolt is also known as Wat Tyler's Rebellion, or it is also known as the Great Rising of 1381. It's a very important historical moment. Wat Tyler's Rebellion, it is called the Uprising, the Great Rising of 1381. They were so much tired of the overtaxation that they finally rose. They spoke, they revolted. What were the reasons of the uprising? Obviously, it was the overtaxed, yes, but there were different reasons. Other different reasons also were there. Socio-economic and political tensions that were generated by Black Death. Black Death के बारे में मैं detail में नहीं जाऊंगी, but it caused havoc in the 1340s. And people Any pandemic brings tensions, any pandemic brings poverty. Similarly, Black Death also brought that, and there were a lot of socio-economic and political tensions that were generated by it. High taxes resulting from the conflict with France, जो 100 years is war चल रही थी. Obviously, every time there is a war, there is again tension. There is every time anything is there, the poor people especially are always the poor people, they are affected by it, extremely affected. Everybody is affected, but the poor people who live by the daily wages are affected more. So yes, the war affected it because of the high taxes that were the result of the war. Then instability within the local leadership of London also was one of the reasons of the uprising. The young king, this time he really played a central part in the suppression of the crisis. He helped to suppress the crisis as much as he could. That was Richard II. Now I move on to talk about the 5 major writers of the age. We have Chaucer, we have Gower, we have Wycliffe, Mandeville, Langland. These are the 5 major writers of age of Chaucer. John Gower, Wycliffe, Mandeville, Langland. Out of these, Mandeville is known as a travel writer. We will talk about the other writers in the next session. Today I want to talk about Geoffrey Chaucer a bit. Geoffrey Chaucer was born in 1340 or 41. The definite date is not known. So it was either 40 or it was 41. In his writings, he has given us extreme amount of cultural references. This is because of the huge amount of impact that he had, or also the huge amount of travels, especially diplomatic missions that he took to France, to Italy. How? Because Geoffrey Chaucer is an exception. I always say this. Whenever we start talking about the life of any of the authors, almost all the authors have a poor background, and it's very difficult to become rich by being an author only. Geoffrey Chaucer is an exception because he came from a rich family, a wealthy family. इनके घर पे wine traders थे. अब जो wine traders हैं, alcohol traders हैं, वो उतने गरीब नहीं होंगे. So he came from a wealthy family, and his family had links with the royal court because they were wine merchants. That gave Geoffrey Chaucer a benefit. The benefit that at a very, very young age, he was associated with the court, with the royal court, and he was made a page to the princess. So at a very young age, he started having this connection with the royal family, and it gave him a lot of benefit in his life. That is the reason that he gives us a wide range of cultural references in his works. Other important thing is that he wrote exclusively in English, almost exclusively in English, and we did not really have any other writer at that point of time writing exclusively in English. Then he was a courtier, as I said, a kind of a civil servant, and at that point of time, starting में इनका main job वही था, being a civil servant. Writing was a hobby for him, a vocation in the beginning. It was a sideline. And he was born into the family of wine traders. And for work, he went to various places from Kent to France and twice to Italy on various missions. When he went on these different places on different missions, he made acquaintance of the works of writers like Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio. And whenever we look at the different influences on his works, we definitely see these names, Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio. because he went there, he had that privilege of getting acquainted with the works of these writers, very, very important writers, Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio. And by reading these writers, he could incorporate different things from the foreign writers in his own writings. So, if we look at his life in detail, we can divide it into three parts. First 30 years of his life are influenced by French literature. Next 15 years of life influenced by Italian literature. And the next 15, the last basically the years of his life, is the English period. It is said that he gained more independence in his writings. He became more independent of the foreign influences. So that's how it has been divided in William J. Long. If we look at the life of Chaucer, this is how William J. Long has talked about the life of Chaucer and even his works. It becomes very easy. I find that when he has divided it into three parts, 30 years French influence, next 15 Italian, next 15 English, it becomes easier to remember also. Now, as I said, his father had connections with the royal household. He was only 17-year-old when Chaucer was made a page to the princess, and this was in 1357. Then, when he was 19 years old, he went with the king on an expedition of 100 Years' War, and that was a first-hand experience for him actually. In 1359 to 1360 के बीच में, he was only 19 years of age, and वहाँ पे he was also taken prisoner. But because he had connection with the royal family, पैसे देके छुड़वा लिया था. So he was ransom was given, and that was the money out of the royal pocket, and he was taken out of the prison. 1366, 6 years later, Chaucer got married. He married Philippa Roet, who is also later referred to as Philippa Chaucer. Who was Philippa Roet? Philippa Roet was actually, you must have heard the name of John of Gaunt. So Philippa Roet was a sister to the wife of John of Gaunt, the Duke of Lancaster. The name also became famous when Chaucer wrote an elegy on the wife of John of Gaunt when she passes away. We'll talk about that later. So he got married to Philippa Roet in 1366. 1377, 10 years later, Chaucer begins his diplomatic career and undertakes various diplomatic missions for King Edward III. When you know about the kings, when you know about the background कि अच्छा ये वाला king था इस time पे जब ये इंसान लिख रहा था, trust me, in the long run it becomes extremely easy and extremely it flows. Literature flows very smoothly in your heads. Otherwise, you're always confused. Then 1382 to 1384, Chaucer completes the first major work of his career, the Book of Duchess. And this is the poetic elegy that I just talked about, the Book of Duchess. The Book of Duchess is written after the death of Blanche, the wife of John of Gaunt. John of Gaunt was Chaucer's patron also. उनकी वाइफ की डेथ पे उन्होंने ये एलिजी लिखी है, द बुक ऑफ डचेस. Then 1387 to 1400, Chaucer works on his most famous work, that is Canterbury Tales. 1400 में Chaucer passed away. Therefore, the Canterbury Tales is unfinished. It is an incomplete work. It is a collection of stories which is told by a group of pilgrims. 1399, Chaucer's fortunes decline. देखो ऐसा होता है ना कि you are associated with a particular king, or you're associated with a particular political party, but that particular political party never stays in reign forever. Life moves on. So, when Richard II came, Chaucer's fortunes declined. He loses his position, and he also was temporarily imprisoned. You can read more about it if you're interested. 1400, Chaucer passes away in London and possibly on October 25th, and he's buried in Westminster Abbey. Westminster Abbey, you must have heard. All the famous writers are buried there. This was about the life of Chaucer. A little bit about his works also. So the first one, as I said, was the Book of Duchess. It is written in the form of dream vision. Last session I told you that so many works are written in the form of dream vision because it was a trend at that point of time. We saw the pearl in the dream vision. Now, even in the time of Chaucer, this was still a trend, a style of writing, dream vision. It is dedicated to John of Gaunt's first wife, Blanche of Lancaster, and it is modeled on French examples. Correct the spelling. French examples पे है ये. Next is from 1373 to 1380 we have the House of Fame. It is a poem in 3 books. It explores the themes of fame, rumor, and the power of language. Again, this is a dream poem, and remember that this is also not finished. Also, a remarkable thing is that Dante wrote a work, The Divine Comedy. Very, very famous work. Dante's Divine Comedy has been taken as an influence in a lot of literature pieces. But for the first time in English, Dante's Divine Comedy is echoed by Chaucer in the House of Fame. It talks about the journey of paradise, the journey of purgatory, hell, Divine Comedy mein. And that is echoed for the first time in the House of Fame by Chaucer. This writing is very interesting. Chaucer becomes a participant in his own writing. He is a poet. In the work also, is a poet who visits the Latin poet Ovid. Remember. So Ovid का House of Fame है, वहां पे Chaucer जाते हैं poetry के अंदर. Why does he go there? He wants to go there to learn about love. So a lot of aspects of love is there in this poem. Also remember that this work has been written in the form of rhyme royal stanza. Where does the term rhyme royal comes from? The name was derived later on from the Scottish King James I. King James I ने work लिखा था King's Square. In that work, the name is derived rhyme royal. So love becomes the subject here. The subject of love is again taken up in 2 of his greatest works. One is Troilus and Cresside. The other is The Legend of Good Women. But before that, late 1370s and early 1380s, he wrote Parliament of Fowls. It is also known as the Assembly of Birds. We've had questions from this also. Valentine's Day pe. It is an allegorical poem in which birds gather to choose their mates on Saint Valentine's Day. Parliament of Fowls. Late 1380s, we have Troilus and Cresside. This is considered his finest work. And it's said that if the Canterbury Tales was not there, still Chaucer would have been the greatest because of Troilus and Cresside. It is a long narrative poem. It is set during the Trojan War. And it is based on the story of Troilus and Cresside from the Greek mythology. These are the characters of the Greek mythology. The source, remember, is Boccaccio. Italian writer Boccaccio is the source of this work. It has even been called the first modern novel Troilus and Cresside, has also been called the first modern novel. This is an exaggeration actually. First modern novel, usko bulana is an exaggeration, but still. Next is The Legend of Good Women, 1380s, early 1390s. Another work which brings in love as an aspect. It is a collection of stories. First time एक linked stories का जो इन्होंने एक pattern बनाया. In the Canterbury Tales also we have kind of stories linked to each other. So, Legend of Good Women, collection of stories in which Chaucer portrays women from various mythological and historical sources. So it was said that, in his dream, these women come to him and tells him that every time you've talked about women who are inconsistent in love, but there have been women who have been very, very much dedicated to their loved ones, to their love. And so you should write something about those women also. So he talks about these women who were faithful in their love life and sacrificed a lot in their love life. Nine legends were written. He had planned for more. The best is the ninth one, which talks about Thisbe. Then late 1380s and early 1390s again, the Canterbury Tales. This is the masterpiece. This is magnum opus of Chaucer. It is again a collection of stories framed as a pilgrimage to Canterbury. Unfinished hai. Wide range of characters and narrative styles we will find in this work, Canterbury Tales. He probably began it somewhere around 1387, it is said. And because he died in 1400, the work remains unfinished. 120 tales were planned originally, but it couldn't be complete. So I will be talking about the Canterbury Tales in detail in the literature wala section. For the history session, this much is enough. I will end the session now and hope that you've understood everything. If there is any doubt, you can ask me in the comment section. Please subscribe to the channel, share it with as many people as possible, and like the video if you liked it. I would love to hear your comments in the comment section. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.